Yes, this is a very special award for me because it's about my favorite topic, of course, cases, but also the fact that some of my students came and wrote and spent time to explain how my cases and my teaching was helpful for them has made it very special. It's actually one of the nicest things about case teaching is that when you meet your students many years later, they will remember bits and pieces of the case that have made a difference for them in their life, and they will tell you that. And it's really one of the many, many benefits of writing and teaching cases. So I think a good case works for a very different audience. Certainly undergrads and graduate students, I wouldn't tailor the teaching that much. But when teaching to executives, we have to be mindful that they don't have as much time to read and prepare the case. And for example, fewer of them typically would answer the case survey. So now for me, the case survey is really useful and it's very important for at least three reasons. Number one, it ensures that the participants have read the case. Number two, it forces them to make a decision and so come to the class with an opinion. Number three, and most importantly, I know beforehand who thought what. This way I can organize the flow of the discussion in the best way possible. For example, I don't have the risk that I call on someone who has found the best answer to the case immediately, which would shut up the discussion. It also allows me to show the distribution of answers. Often MBAs, but also everybody really thinks that everyone thinks like them. And it's known as false consensus bias. And it's really eye-opening for people to see that the other 40 people in the classroom who read the same case had totally different answers, and it's a great learning experience. So I always point out the distribution of answers before class, and I always like to point out that often it's totally normal distribution, which means that if people had chosen randomly, it would probably look like that. So to come back to the earlier question with the executives, because not enough of them typically will have read and answered the case before, I make sure to have time during the class discussion when they can go into a group for 45 minutes or an hour and actually discuss the case and answer the case survey as a group rather than doing it as an individual. And then when they come back, I pull up the results and I show again the distribution and I call on the groups who chose option A, option B, option C in the order that makes sense for me. So my main advice is really, I think it's a good idea to have a case study, at least one with your name on it. It's great because it gives you credibility, but beyond that, it really gives you all the information that you need to be able to teach the students well. And my advice would be to go for quality. It can be time consuming to write a case, so I wouldn't really advise to spend a lot of time writing many cases, but to write really one good case. And a good case for me is a case that's done in collaboration with a company. It's a case where you know what happened from the inside. You don't just know what they did, but you also know what they didn't do and why. And you can then have the information asymmetry, which will really allow you to teach the students and will allow the students to learn something that they couldn't have learned just by reading the news or Googling the company's name. And so once you have a good case like that, you can actually teach it for 10, 15, 20 years because really the key point of the case is how to think about a situation. For example, post-merger integration, or in my case, how do I market brands to the base of the pyramid, which is always going to be around. And the case itself is just a way to articulate the discussion. So a good case is a case that can actually last a very long time, and you don't need to change it every so often. So again, my advice, write one good case, and you'll be very happy you've done it. So guest speakers can be an invaluable addition to the classroom, and students always happy to see that there are guest speakers. However, I think it has to be managed because, for example, I don't think it's a good idea to have one guest speaker per session. First of all, it's very, very time consuming. Depending on where you live, it's not easy to find good guest speakers who will come all the way to where you teach. And also, that's kind of the sad thing, but even really successful business people, not necessarily good guest speakers. For example, there's always a danger that they will turn the classroom into some PR event and telling you about how great the company is, etc. So I always explain to the speakers when they come into my class that the goal is to learn. Yes, probably the company hopefully will get some positive reputation from this experience, but the reputation will be much stronger if, for example, the students realize that they are open and willing to acknowledge not just the successes but also the mistakes. So what I typically do is I invite guest speakers a couple of times. This way I learn also more about the case. I film them, and then I use parts of their interventions depending on my needs in the next iterations. This allows me first to organize the discussion the way I really want it, but also this way I don't have to invite the guest speakers over and over every time I teach. I'm a big believer in props. In fact, all the students, when they come into a new class, they look at what I have on the table because they know that we will have a prop at some point. It could be something as simple as just a pin or logo when it's a service and you don't have something that you can really show physically. But more often than not, I love to actually bring some real products. So for example, for a new case I'm just writing now, I have the Burger King crown. And the Burger King crown is not just there for fun, but it's a really great teaching experience because it's really part of what makes Burger King special. So for example, whenever I have a student who talks about the crown, I actually go in the classroom and put the crown on his or her head. And you can really see the transformation. They feel like a kid again, they feel special, they're smiling. And this is, for example, a very important part of the Burger King case that I'm writing now, which is about how Burger King welcomes everyone and everyone can be a king. But for a different case that I'm writing it now as well, which is about the chocolate candy industry, I like to show different sizes. So I have, the regular, I have the duo pack, and for example, I just got from the company a new stick that they are doing, which allows me to talk about how downsizing can be a way to help the chocolate industry align business, health, and pleasure goals. And of course, in the end, we get to sample some of it.